Occupy protesters in the US have attempted to blockade ports across the West Coast to shut down Wall Street on the waterfalls. Stay with News Analysis as we ask how the Occupy movement is advancing and what it means for the future of America.
Protesters across the U.S. West Coast were out to shut down ports from San Diego to Alaska in an effort to, quote, disrupt the economic machine that they say benefits the wealthiest individuals and corporations. Ports in Oakland, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Portland, Anchorage, Seattle, Tacoma and Houston became new avenues for Occupy protesters to voice their discontent. Their main target, SSA Marine, a shipping line with connections to Goldman Sachs. Wall Street on the waterfront is perhaps the Occupy movement's most dramatic gesture since the police crackdown in several cities sent most remaining protest camps scattering last month. Demonstrators began forming the camps around the US about 2 months ago to protest economic inequality between the richest 1% and the other 99%. In demonstrations in New York and San Francisco, police arrested dozens of Occupy protesters. Latest reports also show undercover police infiltrating Occupy LA's tent city last month to spy on protesters. Organizers of the rallies say they were always troubled by infiltrators who advocated violence against police. The recent demonstrations by the Occupy protesters show the grassroots movement is still alive and efforts by the government to put an end to its gatherings have failed. People are protesting a variety of issues including bank bailouts, corruption, as well as the growing gap between the very rich and those struggling in the aftermath of the US financial crisis.
Well, joining me now live from New York is anti-war activist Mr. Don DeBar. Thank you so much, Don, for being with us. And also on the line from Los Angeles, an Occupy movement protester himself, Professor Mark Mason. Thank you very much, Mr. Mason, for being with us. I'll put the first question to our guest in New York. Don, today we've seen the coordinated response, the protesters are saying, to the coordinated attack against them. Now, when they say the coordinated response, of course, they're referring to their action to occupy ports today and also the gatherings outside Goldman Sachs, for instance, and the Federal Reserve. Now, what do you think about this response? Do you think that it's been a proper response and it's been getting the protesters nearer to their goal?
Yeah, it's both appropriate and also it's, I think, going to be effective. There were better than, I spoke with Mimi Rosenberg, who's a journalist in New York, who was participating outside of Goldman Sachs this morning. I interviewed her on the air on cprmetro.org. She had said at the time there were more than 1,000 people, and this was before it had gotten off the ground. The selection of Goldman Sachs, as you had reported earlier, is because of their interest in the in the ports in the West Coast. It should be remembered that particularly the West Coast is the gateway for the goods that come into the United States from China and Japan, which is a large portion of the U.S.'s purchasing, the portion of GDP that represents consumer purchasing. Much of it comes through those ports, and so to shut them down is an actual material strike at the economy here, and to do it in such a coordinated way shows that there is both an organized response to the attack on the Occupy movement and also solidarity among the various groups with one another and with workers, and reciprocal solidarity by the workers with the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Right, so Don, you're saying that this is an effective movement as well as the fact that it's showing the solidarity of the protesters. Let's put this next question to Mark. Now, yes. Mark, do you think that it is effective when Don says that it's effective? How effective do you think it is, and what is the effect that it's putting? I mean, how is it being effective if you indeed think it is?
Let me first say, I'm in the city of Oakland, which is about 350 miles north of the port of Los Angeles, and we're looking at the crisis of the global capitalist system. It's in crisis. and we see it evident here at the Port of Oakland. It's been very effective. We've had protesters arrive at 6 a.m. this morning, 5:30 to 6. They have shut down the port. The Port of Oakland is shut down and inoperative at this time. We've also had reliable reports that the Port of Portland is also reliably information. We know it's shut down, and that this afternoon the Port of Seattle will also be invited by the community members to shut down their port. So it's very effective, and we're looking really at a global, significant global crisis of the state capitalist system.
Right. Well, I'd just like to welcome Mr. Tighe Barry, a Wall Street protester who's I'm hearing is now joining us now live from Washington. Welcome, Tighe. Now, the question that I'll put to you, our guests here up until now, just to let you know, have been saying how effective this movement has been and how people are showing how coordinated they are in this Occupy movement. Now, one issue that's come up in a lot of reports today is the role of the unions, especially when it came to the Occupy ports movement. A lot of reports were saying, well, the unions are not supporting this. Why do you think the unions do not or cannot give the direct support to the protesters, and how do you think that is influencing the movement?
Well, I have to disagree. I think the unions are giving a lot of support. The one thing that the Occupy here in Washington, D.C. wants to make clear is we do support unions, we support union workers, but we, at the same time, for example, the SEIU endorsed Barack Obama without getting anything in return. So we are just saying that the unions can't co-opt this effort for the Democrat Party, but we always welcome union and union workers. I myself am in a union.
Right, so, but the union leaders, are they giving the Occupy movement the direct support maybe that it needs? Do you think the leaders are doing enough?
Well, I think that it's a very touchy situation. I think, I know that the unions are giving financial support. They're supporting in, like when they came out here to, they call it Occupy Congress. When the unions came here on the mall, everybody worked together. But the Occupy movements are being very careful not to allow the Democrat Party to take control on our Occupy. And we're trying to stay neutral. But of course, the unions, I feel, have been helpful, and I think they'll continue to be helpful.
Right. Don DeBar, let's put this next question to you. Now, the argument that the protesters are putting forward is that there is an official attempt now to delegitimize them and to criminalize the movement. First of all, do you think that there is this coordinated attempt to do that, and how is that taking place?
Well, most definitely there's an attempt by the powers that be to find a way to squash this any way they can. Their strategy has been, first of all, premised on the idea that the occupations are about taking control of a piece of real estate, whether it's Zuccotti Park or whatever space the occupiers are in, and to treat it almost as a conventional ground war to take the land back. As they're finding out, however, for example, as they found out in Oakland weeks ago, all that does is create the need for an immediate response by the people who are organizing themselves, essentially, into these groups. And in Oakland, what ended up happening was the unions stood in solidarity with the Occupy groups, and they shut down the ports for a day then. This is today, the action where they're shutting down the ports across the West Coast is an expression, in my opinion, of actually further integration of union members, if not their leadership, into this movement. Because bear in mind, a union is a political construct, not dissimilar from the society at large, where you have the rank and file members, and then you have people that are elected or in other ways come to leadership positions in the union. There's a particular particular point where the direction that the leadership proposes, when it fails, leaves them in a position of having to be, to explain why to their membership. And when you have a situation now where the members are under such stress, I mean, there are maybe half as many or less members in organized labor now as there were 30 years ago. Well, then the leadership has to be careful that they don't get left behind by the rank and file, which is what's happened in some cases. And in other cases, some of the leadership is actually taking the bull by the horns. For example, in New York, where early on the SEIU and other unions joined together with the Occupy movement, protecting them from the police and protecting them from being dissolved by Mayor Bloomberg, where you had 30, 40,000 strong union members marching with the occupation people. They are 99%. First of all, union workers and groups like black folks and other minority groups, so-called, have been on the business end of capitalism in this country for a very long time. And now you have the middle class sort of dissolving into that group also, which is kind of the fuel originally for the Occupy movement. But the people involved in that have been very smart and very open to acknowledging their commonality with everyone else, providing and taking leadership from people of color, union members, and others, while not allowing it to be co-opted. And by the way, people from SEIU and other unions are also, the rank and file, determined to not see it be co-opted by the Democrats or Working Families Party or any of these other groups either.
Right. I'll come back to that question about more rather about the identity of this protest movement. But just before we run out of time, I'd like to ask Mark about this as well. Now, Mark, let's focus on the response that the protest movement has been getting from the authorities. Now, we saw, of course, the eviction of protesters from their camps. We've been seeing the arrests. We saw the incident in Oakland that I'm certain are well aware of, the war veteran being hit in the head with a projectile, the pepper spraying incident, and lots more. And now these have raised accusations of U.S. hypocrisy, so to speak, when it comes to dealing with protests, whether Washington is actually pursuing the option of repression rather than dialogue towards this protest movement. What do you think?
Oh, yes. The hypocrisy is absolutely astonishing that U.S. officials would chide Russia, imploring Russia that they must allow their protesters to freely protest in the streets of Moscow, while 5,000, more than 5,000 protesters here in the United States have been arrested to date so far. And as you already mentioned, Scott Olson was severely injured. He's out of the hospital now, and that's good. But attacks on peaceful protesters are, to use the word, routine. And we have today a situation where protesters are out there. The police were in force here at the Port of Oakland, but as of this hour, they have not made any motion towards the protesters here on the ground. But it's absolutely outrageous. At the national level, we're getting absolutely unbelievable hypocrisy as you noted about Russia.
Well, Tighe Barry, let's put this question to you as well. When parts of the international community, so to speak, looks at the situation in America, maybe a lot of people would be expecting, for instance, President Obama or other authorities to address the nation on this, to make an announcement, to say something about it. But what it looks like from outside is that the government, the authorities, it looks like they're actually not paying attention or deliberately ignoring or not refusing to make any kind of statement. How are you guys feeling about this, who are involved in the protest movement in the U.S.?
Well, here in Washington, D.C., we have obviously many representatives close at hand. Just today there was a huge protest at the White House. There were several arrests. People were there en masse to protest the visit of al-Maliki and to call for another end to the Afghan war. And I think the Occupy movement, the unifying message in all the Occupies is we want dialogue. We want dialogue with our leadership in Washington, D.C. We want dialogue with the business community. We want to form a new community. We can't go back to the same old regime. We have to change this regime. We have to change it from the bottom up. And I think dialogue is important. And yes, I believe our leaders in Washington, D.C. have ignored us. I'll give you a perfect example. Tea Party had, last year here in Washington, D.C., had maybe 50 people up in Upper Senate Park. And they had 20 representatives go out there and address their group. Not that we want our representatives to addressing our group, but we want the representatives to actually sit down with us and listen to what we have. We are offering change, real change. We're offering a new way forward, and they need to start dialoguing with us.
Well, just today even, President Obama was speaking, Don DeBar, about the situation in Syria, as he's been also speaking about the situations in other Arab states. He keeps making that statement that these politicians should start talking with those people who have demands rather than repressing them, that dialogue is so vital in a democracy. Why are we not seeing this dialogue, Don, in the case of the United States?
Well, first of all, President Obama.
Yes, if Don DeBar could answer that question.
Hello, yeah.
Yes,
his
Don,
perspective is entirely different from that which he preaches. The first thing that we have to keep in mind is that there's been an insertion into the defense appropriations bill of a plan essentially to militarize the United States body politic, where the military will be able to pick up U.S. citizens and cart them off to jail with no process whatsoever. And it came out over the weekend that that was inserted into the defense appropriations bill at the request of President Obama, who seems to be looking downstream a little bit at what happens as the Occupy movements gather steam. The most important part of what's happening with the Occupy movements is the creation of direct democratic models in the form of the General Assemblies at the bottom. And what is happening, whether people are doing it consciously or not, is there is a new government structure, a structure of self-government that is coming into existence in this country at the sites and across the sites of these occupation movements, where people will are beginning to make decisions themselves about what they want, and when the system fails to respond, which it will, then they will come and find on the agenda how to decide among themselves what to do about it and how to secure for themselves the things that they need, that we need. And that has to do with economic needs, social needs, and political needs. So there will be a point in time where no matter what repressive measures this government puts into place over and above those that they've already installed. I'll point out that in Russia over the weekend, where they had 20 to 40,000 people in Moscow alone, there were no arrests, no one beaten, no one carted off. And for the president of a country with a history of water cannons and police dogs to meet innocent protesters in the 1960s, that has only changed with the introduction of better technologies of repression. I see nothing but conflict and ultimately self-government in this country.
Right. So, Don, you're saying that this is leading to self-government. Mark Mason, let's put that question to you. Well, the protesters have been saying that politicians from both parties have been supporting and working for the corporations, so they couldn't be representing, and they're part of the 1%. So who can represent this 99%? And do you agree that this is leading the movement to a kind of self-government, as Don is proposing?
Yes, I think that's a fair characterization. We're talking about money, really, really big money. There's a massive disconnect between the 99% and the 1%. Obama is beginning to run his campaign for the 2012 re-election campaign, and it's estimated that his campaign alone will spend $1 billion with a B, an astonishing amount of money, a huge sum of money, just primarily on TV advertisements and other types of marketing that's going to be spun out from not Wall Street, but Market Avenue in New York.
Madison
We're
Avenue.
talking about $1 billion for both candidates. We're talking about funding that is already coming into Obama's campaign that we know it's documented. Where's it coming from? Wall Street. He's going, the primary source of funds, the highest individual donation that he received during the 2008 election was from Goldman Sachs, a major bank on Wall Street. And he's turning again to Wall Street again right now. Not at this minute that we speak, but there's on record that he's taking massive donations from Wall Street. So we really have a puppet show. This is the puppet show at Washington. Nothing that comes out of their mouth really has any credibility. They have no credibility whatsoever. And the people are setting up their own individual direct democracy in hundreds of local Occupy units.
Right. Well, Tighe Barry, speaking of what the protesters are demanding and how the government can be responding, well, as part of the protest movement, what are you expecting from the government when we are speaking about corporatism here, when we are speaking about the capitalist system generally here? Can the government, so to speak, bring about the changes that people are demanding only with minor surgery? So are you asking the government and the authorities in the US to bring about a fundamental change to the financial system that will undermine the interests of those people who are in power themselves right now?
Well, I just got to say, my expectations from this government and any government that we can elect in the future is going to be extremely low. As you see, 9% of the American public believes that Congress is doing a fairly decent job. That's 9%. I think that everyone realizes that they're doing a great job for the 1%, but doing nothing for the 99%. This government needs to start dialoguing with its people, or they're going to continue having the people take to the streets, protest, and it's just, it will not stop. This movement is not over. We are growing every day, and we will continue to grow, and you will see that this government will have to one day sit down and listen to the demands of the people, and I hope it comes sooner than later.
Right, and we've just got under a minute left. I'd like to put the last question to Don DeBar. Don, if you can tell us in less than a minute, do you think that lawmakers, the Congress, can now do anything to meet the protesters' demand? Who can help them?
Well, one of the problems is that Congress is essentially a hired hand for Wall Street. I mean, Mark was right on the money about that with respect to the presidency, and that extends through both houses of Congress. And the economic mandate, essentially, for Wall Street, for the capitalist system is, and it's built into it, that they need to reach deeper and broader to extract more and more intensive value. And as they acquire everything, I mean, there's essentially been a class war, and they won. The question is, now what? Because there's no longer any need for a game. Since nothing can be accomplished except sweeping aside the power base of Congress, Congress is not in a position to do anything. It's going to have to come from the people, and the people are making the moves necessary to take that step.
Thank you very much. Don DeBar, anti-war activist, joining us there live from New York. I'd also like to thank Mr. Tighe Barry, an Wall Street protester, joining us live from Washington. And a big thank you as well to Professor Mark Mason, an Occupy movement protester, joining us on the line from Los Angeles. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm afraid we've run out of time. From me, Homa Lezgi, and the team here in Tehran. Until our next program.